My name is Octavia Powell, and I work in the Strategic Initiative Unit here for RiskTransfer. I specialize in EPLI and professional liability coverages, as well as with the carve-out and ASO placements we work on daily. The acronym SIU stands for the Strategic Initiative Unit. The SIU unit represents basically a collection of a team, myself and two other wonderful ladies. And we are the go-to basically for helping clients find coverage where they can't otherwise. We form, like you said, design insurance coverages that best fit them and try to best match the carriers as best as we can in alternative means other than what they've already tried. Just last week, we had a client, mid-sized client with a fairly challenging loss experience. And what we were able to do was to place them with one of our alternative markets through a partner, business partner, and we're able to find work comp coverage for them, which otherwise they would have had to go to an assigned risk type environment where the expenses are much higher than in the standard market. EPLI stands for Employment Practices Liability Insurance. It is a protection mechanism for employers against allegations brought on by current or even former employees around employment practices, whether it's wrongful termination, discrimination, retaliation. That's the type of environment that EPLI helps to help mitigate losses with. Not all policies are created equal. In fact, it's very important for employers to remember that if they have a general liability policy, employment practices are not included and are usually excluded from that policy. And that's a misconception that most people think that the employment practices are actually covered by a general liability policy. Well, in fact, it's usually excluded. Wage and hour coverage is an extension of the EPLI policy form. It provides protection as far as defense costs, where allegations are brought against an employer regarding a potential violation of a federal or state law that concerns the way that employees are paid. One of the common claims involving EPLI is wage and hour claims. In fact, they are on the rise, roughly 10.8% according to the EEOC study recently conducted. And it's very important because, for instance, we have experienced a claim where a medium restaurant chain had asked several employees to perform non-managerial tasks, and these particular employees were classified in a way that they were not eligible for overtime pay. So these employees gathered together and formed a class action. The government actually granted that class action status. And once that mid-sized restaurant chain saw the potential and effect of what it might have in the long run, well before it even reached the trial phase, and saw that defense costs would be roughly $750,000, they decided to settle a case for a little over $1 million. We've learned that even in this particular case, this employer had just about ironclad practices, so they thought. And so it's important for employers to keep the employees well within the scope of their jobs. And if they are to their jobs change or promoted, that their classification as far as pay is according to the federal law or state law and followed as such. This is what we're doing day in and day out every day. We're learning more and more about the changes and letting our clients be aware of those changes, and also where the clients aren't currently purchasing EPLI, we're educating them and showing them how important it is and getting more and more of them to at the very least consider it and most purchase. The SIU does exactly that. It educates our clients on a daily basis. We help mitigate their risks and help them actually perform even better and in return have better well-rounded businesses. One question asks whether or not they've hired an employee recently. Another question is, is it a practice for that firm to write recommendations for former employees? Another question is whether or not the company makes changes as far as employee practices and whether or not they involve an HR professional. If an employer involves an HR professional, then that's great. But if the employer doesn't involve an HR professional, then it could be that they could potentially be violating a federal or state law, which makes them susceptible to a potential claim. So these and other questions help determine whether or not an employer has an EPLI exposure. For the most part, if an employer has employees, the exposure is there. Well, the misconception, again, is that the smaller employers don't have that exposure. Well, in fact, they do. For instance, there's a claim example where a small car dealership of 3 employees, and the same employer had about $100,000 in annual sales. And in this case, there was a class action suit brought against them by several other former employees, and they actually paid out $94,000 between court fees and the settlement costs. And for a small firm like that, that was critical to their success. EPLI coverage isn't just a big business issue. It's for small business, mid-size, and large businesses. Professional liability insurance, or also known as errors and omissions coverage, provides employers protection against potential claims that involve mistakes that may have happened, and it is mostly involved with pretty much every business because they offer products or services. It's important to have professional liability insurance because it covers potential claims that involve the products and services that companies offer to clients and customers. There are several types of professional liability policies offered by carriers, mostly specialized and specific to certain operations. For instance, accountants, lawyers, insurance agents, health professionals, and especially those dear to our hearts for temp staffing agencies and PEOs. The client determines whether or not they need professional liability insurance by best answering several questions. One includes whether or not does that company offer a service or products for a fee. Another question is does that company sign contracts that require that company have professional liability insurance? Another question is, do your clients use your product or service as a part of their product or service, which leaves the gate wide open to potential claims. And professional liability policy would respond to such claims as misrepresentations, errors, omissions, and it's very easy. The professional liability policy responds to such allegations as far as errors, omissions, misrepresentations. It's fairly easy for an errors or omissions claim to come about, whether it's misstating something or doing something forgetting to do something that you should have, or misplacing a document. And for our clients especially, these things can and will happen, which could generate an E&O claim. One example of an E&O claim involved a real estate agent where a claim was brought against a real estate agent alleging misrepresentation on the layout of a house that was purchased. It also involved the misrepresentation of the actual build of the home, where the buyers eventually brought suit against that agent, and the claim resulted in a final settlement of $95,000. We learned how important it is to be accurate, and in the information that we offer, as a company, it's very important to be accurate in the information that you portray to your clients and customers. It's also very important where if you do discover that a mistake was made, is that you very diligently and quickly correct it and make that mistake be known. In many cases, an E&O claim can be avoided if that information, the mistake or whatever might have happened, is revealed and honestly, shown to the client. And usually that client is very much impressed and better serviced by that honesty. What really makes me proud about specializing in these coverages is the fact that it's an education piece. Many customers either know or have heard of the coverage but haven't been able to take the time and truly assess whether or not that exposure and that risk is, and they're susceptible to that. What makes me most proud is when a client says, or has an aha moment and says, I didn't know that could happen to me. I didn't know that I was open to that type of risk. And when they leave the room from that meeting and they see and value that education and later purchase the coverage and realize how valuable it is, that's the most proud moment of assessing that company, because I know that that company now is better fitted for the environment that we're in. Just to be open-minded and to ask yourself those questions regarding EPLI and professional liability, and to understand that it's not just a big business issue. It's for mid-size and small-size businesses as well. And as long as you take the time and assess and simply ask yourself those questions. And if you answer yes to any of those questions, feel free to contact us, and we are here to help.